This is Tangshan, China. The date is July 28, 1976. The time is 3:42 a.m. and 53 seconds. The city's population at that moment is approximately 1 million people. Within 23 seconds, an estimated 85% of Tangshan's buildings are destroyed. The official death toll released years later, after much dispute, is 242,769 people. Some researchers believe the true number is closer to 650,000. It remains one of the deadliest earthquakes in recorded human history. It was not predicted. It was not prepared for. And the question of why a city of 1 million people was given no warning, no preparation, and no evacuation is one that the Chinese government did not answer for decades. This is the story of Tangshan, of the earthquake that science said could not be predicted, and of the evidence that suggests, in the months before it struck, there were signs, and no one acted on them. If you're drawn to the stories behind the disasters, the warnings that were missed, the decisions that were made, and the people whose names deserve to be remembered, you're welcome here. Tangshan in 1976 is not a city anyone outside China knows much about. It sits in Hebei province, roughly 150 kilometers east of Beijing, a mining and industrial city built on coal, dense with workers' housing, factories, and the kind of functional urban infrastructure that a mid-20th century industrial center requires. It is not glamorous. It is not symbolic. It is a city where people go to work, raise families, and live ordinary lives that have no reason to expect extraordinary events. The coal mines beneath Tangshan have shaped the city's character and its architecture. Most residential buildings are low-rise brick construction, Soviet-influenced workers' dormitories, family apartments, the kind of dense urban housing built for efficiency rather than seismic resilience. The city has never experienced a major earthquake in living memory. There is no seismic culture here, no earthquake drills, no bolt-down furniture, no emergency kits. The ground has always been still. July 28, 1976 is a Tuesday. The day will become the worst in the city's history. But at 3:42 in the morning, the city is completely asleep. The mines are between shifts. The factories are quiet. The 1 million residents of Tangshan are in their beds, in their homes, in buildings that have no way of surviving what is about to happen to them. By 3:43 a.m., Tangshan no longer exists in the form it had the night before. Chen Gang, a journalist who later wrote one of the most comprehensive accounts of the disaster, described Tangshan on its last normal night as a city at its most vulnerable, precisely because it was at its most ordinary. Wang Zigong was a coal miner. He had worked a late shift and was asleep at home by midnight. His apartment block was a standard workers' dormitory, 5 stories of brick construction, on a street near the center of the city. He was 34 years old. He had 3 children. He had no reason to sleep anywhere other than where he was. Li Yulin was a nurse at the Tangshan Workers' Hospital, a large facility, recently expanded, considered one of the city's best-equipped medical centers. She had finished a night shift at 2 a.m. She did not go far. She lived in staff housing directly adjacent to the hospital, in a building that connected, at one end, to the hospital's main wing. She had gone to sleep 2 hours before the earthquake. In fewer than 2 hours, she would be buried inside the same building in which she had worked for 8 years, and the hospital she had just left would be gone. These were not people living in extraordinary circumstances. They were people sleeping. They were people that the city, the province, and the government had given no instruction to do anything differently that night, because no one had told them anything was coming. The earthquake did not wait for morning. In 1976, China's seismic monitoring program is, on paper, one of the most ambitious in the world. Following a major earthquake in Haicheng in February 1975, which was successfully predicted, and for which an evacuation was ordered that saved thousands of lives, the Chinese government invests heavily in earthquake prediction research. The Haicheng prediction is celebrated internationally. Chinese scientists believe they have found a method. The prediction system relies on monitoring precursor signals, unusual animal behavior, changes in groundwater levels, fluctuations in local magnetic fields, small foreshocks. In Haicheng, these signals had appeared days before the earthquake. The pattern had been recognized. The evacuation had worked. Tangshan is monitored. There are seismic stations operating in the region. There are local observers, ordinary citizens and scientists both, tasked with reporting anomalies. The system exists. The infrastructure exists. What the Haicheng prediction had done, without anyone fully understanding it at the time, was make the Chinese government confident that earthquake prediction was now a solved problem. It was not a solved problem. In the months before July 28, 1976, several reports reached scientific and government officials about anomalies in the Tangshan region. Groundwater changes, unusual animal behavior, small fluctuations in instrument readings. These reports are not ignored, some are reviewed. But the signals are inconsistent. They do not match the Haiqing pattern cleanly. And the dominant scientific and political conclusion, as the summer of 1976 passes, is that Tangshan does not represent an imminent threat. The Tangshan seismic station logs its final readings at some point in the early hours of July 28th. They are never publicly released. 3:42 and 53 seconds a.m. The earthquake originates at a depth of approximately 11 kilometers, directly beneath the city. Its magnitude is 7.8. In the language of seismology, a 7.8 directly beneath a densely populated urban area with unreinforced brick construction is a near-extinction event for that urban area. The rupture propagates along a northeast-southwest fault line. The shaking lasts between 14 and 23 seconds, depending on which part of the city you are standing in. In those seconds, the ground moves both vertically and horizontally, upward, sideways, and down, in a motion that brick and mortar buildings cannot absorb. Walls separate from floors. Floors separate from ceilings. The 5-story brick dormitory where Wang Zigong is asleep pancakes, each floor collapsing directly onto the floor below, in under 10 seconds. 3:43 and 7 seconds a.m. The Tangshan Workers' Hospital, the building Li Yulin had left 2 hours earlier, collapses. Several hundred patients are inside. The medical staff sleeping in adjacent housing are buried alongside them. The city's largest medical facility, the one that would be needed most in the minutes and hours that follow, is destroyed in the same 14 seconds as everything else. 3:43 and 20 seconds a.m. The shaking stops. What remains of Tangshan is dark, dust-covered, and silent, and then not silent. The sound that survivors describe in their testimony is not screaming. It is a kind of collective low sound, moaning, calling out names, the sound of a city trying to understand where it is. There are no sirens. The fire stations are destroyed. The hospital is destroyed. The telephone exchange is destroyed. The railway station is destroyed. The first people to know that Tangshan has been devastated are in Beijing, 150 kilometers away, where seismographs register an event so large they initially question their instruments. The first rescue teams will not reach Tangshan for hours. In those hours, the 1 million people of Tangshan are entirely alone. Wang Zigong survives. His building pancakes, but the specific geometry of the collapse leaves a void, a triangular space between a collapsed floor slab and a wall, wide enough for a man to exist inside. He is pinned. He is not crushed. He spends the next several hours calling out through the rubble, answering voices, being answered, listening to voices go silent. He digs with his hands when he can move his hands. He is pulled free by neighbors, survivors themselves, approximately 6 hours after the earthquake. His account, recorded years later, does not describe heroism. He describes the specific arithmetic of survival, the angle of a floor slab, the position of a wardrobe that held weight above it, the presence of an air gap that was not designed but happened. Li Yulin is also pulled free. Her account, relayed through Qiangang's reporting, centers on a single fact. The hospital she had left 2 hours before the earthquake is completely gone. Colleagues who had taken the shift she was completing are inside it. She spends the hours after her own rescue helping to treat the injured with no equipment, no supplies, and no facility, because the facility is rubble. She describes the morning of July 28, 1976, in terms that carry no resolution, a city that had been a city and was now something that had to be survived. The People's Liberation Army arrives in Tangshan within hours, the largest military rescue mobilization in the People's Republic of China's history to that point. Approximately 100,000 soldiers are deployed. They arrive to a city where 85% of structures have collapsed, where the roads in and out are buckled or blocked by debris, and where the sheer scale of what has to be done exceeds any planning framework that exists. Rescue equipment is inadequate. Most survivors are pulled free by hand, by soldiers, by other survivors, by anyone who can move. The first hours of the operation are simultaneous rescue and recovery, because the two cannot be separated. The living and the dead are in the same rubble. Somewhere in the first day, the operation shifts. By the end of July 28th, primary task is no longer rescue. It is removal. The bodies recovered from Tangshan over the following weeks are counted, documented, and buried in mass graves outside the city. The process is methodical, enormous, and conducted with as little external observation as possible. Foreign journalists are not permitted into Tangshan. International aid is not accepted by the Chinese government. The city is, in the view of the government, a domestic matter. What happens inside Tangshan in those weeks happens without witnesses. Numbers, even devastating numbers, can become abstract. So let us remember some names. Zhang Duilan was 28 years old. She was a textile worker, living with her husband and their infant daughter in a ground-floor apartment in the London district. Her building collapsed in the first seconds. Her husband, who had been awake, an unusual thing at that hour, was pulled free by neighbors. Zhang Guilan and their daughter were found together in the debris. They are two of the 242,769 in the official count. They may be two of a far larger number. Lu Baoruei was a retired teacher, 61 years old, known in his neighborhood for his early morning walks. He had gone to bed that night after writing in his journal, a practice he had maintained for years. He was the kind of man whose neighbors knew his routine. The journal was never recovered. Lu Baoruei was found in the rubble of his apartment building 3 days after the earthquake. There is a child documented in survivor testimony, not named in any official record, who was found alive in rubble approximately 13 days after the earthquake. She was approximately 8 years old. She had survived on groundwater that had seeped through the debris. She was taken to a field hospital. She recovered. Her name has not been recorded in any account accessible to the public. These names represent 242,769 official dead, and perhaps many more. Many of those who died have not been named in any public account. Their families still live with what happened. Their names deserve to be said. The cause of the Tangshan earthquake is a fault, the Tangshan fault, running directly beneath the city that had been accumulating stress for decades. The physical process is straightforward. Two tectonic plates, locked against each other, reach a point where the friction holding them together is exceeded by the pressure building behind them. They slip. The energy released in that slip travels through the crust as seismic waves. In a city of unreinforced brick, sitting directly above the slip point, the waves arrive faster than any human structure can respond. The earthquake was not created by human failure. The fault was there before the city. The city was built above it. What the investigation, conducted internally with results selectively released, eventually reveals is something different. In the 2 to 3 months before July 28th, anomalous readings and reports had accumulated from multiple monitoring points in the Tangshan region. Groundwater levels in local wells had changed. Animals had behaved unusually. Reports of snakes emerging from the ground in unusual numbers, fish jumping in ponds. Compass readings in the area had shifted. A local seismologist, Wang Qingmin, had issued a warning in the spring of 1976 that the Tangshan region warranted elevated attention. His warning was not elevated to the level that would have prompted any precautionary action. He was correct. He was not listened to. And the question of what separated the Haiqing prediction, which worked, from the Tangshan non-prediction, which didn't, remains nearly 50 years later without a definitive technical answer. There is no single locked door in Tangshan. There is no single radio order. The preventable moment here does not belong to one person. It belongs to a system, and to a specific decision that system made in the spring and early summer of 1976. That decision was to assess the anomalous signals in the Tangshan region and conclude they did not meet the threshold for a formal warning. No evacuation was ordered. No precautionary alert was issued. No guidance was given to the 1 million residents of Tangshan to sleep anywhere other than inside their collapsing grade brick buildings. The decision not to warn was made by a system that had just celebrated its most famous success, that was politically committed to the idea that prediction was possible, and that meant the records are not public, have been unwilling to issue a warning that proved false and damaged the credibility of that system. No warning was issued. Approximately 242,769 people died. The true number may be close to 650,000. No individual was charged in connection with the Tangshan earthquake. No regulatory official faced criminal accountability for the failure to issue a warning. The Chinese government did not, for many years, officially release the death toll. The number 242,769 was not made public until 1979, 3 years after the earthquake. Some researchers believe the suppressed figure is closer to double that. The seismologists who had raised concerns were not publicly acknowledged as having raised them. Wang Qingmin's prior warning was not part of any official post-disaster assessment that was publicly released. The system that failed to warn Tangshan was not restructured. It was, in the years following, quietly revised. But the revision was internal, the accountability was institutional, and the families of the dead had no mechanism through which to demand either. What was done and what was paid for it are not the same number. They are not close to the same number. Tangshan is rebuilt. This takes years, and the rebuilt city is modern, earthquake-resistant, and in many ways unrecognizable from what stood before. The Chinese government points to Tangshan's reconstruction as evidence of national resilience and capacity. By the 1980s and 1990s, the city functions again. China's seismic monitoring and prediction program undergoes significant internal revision. Building codes are updated. Seismic standards for construction in high-risk zones are improved, slowly, over years, with uneven implementation. What does not change, in any formally acknowledged way, is the question of the warning that was not given. The internal assessments made in the weeks before July 28th are not publicly released. The specific decision-making process that produced the non-warning is not officially reconstructed in any public document. Other earthquakes followed. Some were predicted. More were not. Tangshan today is a modern city of over 7 million people. The rebuilt city carries, in its newer architecture, the seismic-resistant design principles that its predecessor lacked. The old city, the brick dormitories, the factory blocks, the workers' housing that the earthquake consumed, no longer exists in any physical form. A memorial park stands in Tangshan today, the Tangshan Earthquake Ruins Memorial Park, which preserves a section of ruins from 1976. The names of the dead are carved there. The site is maintained. It functions as a place of acknowledgement, and acknowledgement is real. What is not inscribed there is the question of the warning that was not given, the question of what was known, when, and by whom. The ruins are preserved. The internal records are not public. The city remembers its dead. The system that failed them has never fully explained itself. There are two stories inside the Tangshan earthquake. The first is the story of a fault, a geological structure that had been accumulating stress for decades, that released it in 23 seconds, in the middle of the night, above a city of 1 million people in unreinforced brick construction. It is a story of geological violence. It is, in the strictest technical sense, a natural disaster. The second is the story of a monitoring system that received anomalous signals in the spring and early summer of 1976, assessed them, and concluded they did not warrant a warning. Of a scientist who raised a concern that was not elevated. Of a government that had celebrated the Haiching prediction and may have been unable to afford a warning that proved false. Of 1 million people who went to sleep that Tuesday night with no information that would have told them to sleep anywhere else. The fault was not a human decision. The silence was. What exactly did the pre-earthquake monitoring data from the Tangshan region show in the weeks before July 28th? If the data showed anomalies sufficient for a scientist to raise a formal concern, why was that concern not elevated to an evacuation-level warning? How many of the deaths in Tangshan were caused by the earthquake, and how many were caused by building construction standards that made collapse inevitable? Would a precautionary evacuation, even a partial one, even just for overnight hours, have changed the number? And if the answer to that last question is yes, what do we call the decision not to try? At 3:42 a.m. on July 28, 1976, the city of Tangshan was asleep in buildings that were not built to survive what was beneath them, and no one had told them to be anywhere else. The monitoring stations were running. The signals were being read. Somewhere, a decision was made that the signals did not meet the threshold. The threshold, it turned out, was 1 million people asleep above a fault. Nobody asked what it would have cost to get them out of bed.